Oh, we're live. This is the Narrative Game Club, and we're really happy to be here. Just some background. At some point, the directors came to me and they're like, "We're going to do this staff spotlight. Do you want to do anything?" And I was like, "I want to talk about games, like with people, like as if we don't already do that." But I love reading books, talking about those with people, and I figured, why not do that with some friends from the internet about video games? So here we are. I'm Wozza. I teach English for my normal job, but for VGM Together, I manned the community lead position. And that was really just a fancy way of me saying, hey, you should host this game so people can have fun. And that's pretty much my position. We have Greg here.
Hey, I'm Greg. I'm gplord, or I guess on Twitch, gplord dev. I am the design lead for VGM Together, and I also work with our fearless Texelsaur on the VR offerings. So yeah, if you are liking the designs and or the transformation of a couple of little eighth notes into some Metal Gear this weekend, that's what I do.
It's a great trailer. We have Nujj.
Hi, I'm Nujj. I'm one of the co-directors here at VGM Together. So according to the bio thing, that means I do yes.
We have Danny.
Hello, I'm Danny, also known as Dannymusic. I am a trombonist and one of the members of the game Brass. And for VGM Together, I helped out with the panels side as well as bringing a couple other awesome people on board.
And we have Monica.
Hey, I am omgitsmonika. I'm the social media person for VGM Together. Yeah.
Cool. So we got together, voted on some offerings of games we wanted to play, and it ended up being, I'm going to butcher this name because it's Spanish, but I think it's Gris. And we played it within sometime in the last month. We all procrastinated. And then
No, I didn't. I played it right when you told me to.
Okay, Nujj did it on time because she's very responsible.
Coming out swinging.
You're supposed to show solidarity, Nujj.
I had done it like years before.
Yeah, and actually, I think quite a few of us did play it earlier, but that's the impact that it left on us. That we felt that that's a game that we really did want to talk about. And so, if you don't know anything about the game, it's a very casual, light platformer almost with some puzzles, and the story is very thematic and loose. And I actually kind of wanted to start off the conversation with you guys, just kind of talking about what do you think about that as part of narratives? Like, what in your mind counts as a narrative, or what do you look for in a narrative? Because when I put that option on the list, I was going, this is very interpretive, and I'm not quite sure what our group's going to think about that, but that's why I wanted to let you guys vote. So I'll open the floor to you guys about that.
I have a thing for that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I day job, I'm sort of in academics and have done similar sort of things to this in my own sort of work. And one of the things I try to sort of plant as a thought early on is like the idea that, somebody sat down with a story in their head and decided to make a game and not, a short film or a visual novel or something. And all of the work that goes into sort of making it the structure of a game and what sort of things are afforded to you by making it a game. Those are all decisions that theoretically add up to the idea that like this particular story is best told by being interactive, or is best sort of told by being, something that involves mechanics and sort of experimentation as a player. So that's, I think, the kind of first thought that I have with something like this is like, what about the narrative of this is like better served by being a game, or could only be served by being a game?
Yeah, and the game has no real text in it, for those of you who haven't played it in the audience. And the there's nothing to really orient you to tell you what is the main character Gree experiencing. You know that she is a singer, but then loses her ability to sing and then tumbles from a very high spot in the sky for about 30 seconds as the hand of a statue that she was sitting in crumbles. And her world then turns to gray, which reflects her name. And you progress through the game in the same environment, but as you gain more powers and you solve certain puzzles, the world shifts in colors from gray to red to green to blue, and to a mixture of all those together. And so it's really hard to describe it to anybody who hasn't played it, just because it's so loose in its details. It doesn't really inform you what exactly she is exploring, what she's dealing with emotionally, but those are really the only clues that you have, that it is emotional. So I guess since I spoke about the colors, were there any areas to you guys that stuck out in terms of how the colors were used, or maybe what you were exploring as Gree goes through this emotional journey that she has? And I guess you can also speak to, what do you think she's dealing with on an emotional level?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, definitely for me, the first area stuck out a lot because you're kind of thrust into this game, and like you said, it's very open for interpretation. And this game, just playing it and experiencing it, I streamed it on Thursday, and that was my first ever experience. But as soon as this one was suggested, I voted for it because I'd heard nothing but incredible things. And playing through it really reminded me that video games are art, and it's something that I definitely forget about when I'm playing and raging in Overwatch. I forget that games are art, and this absolutely reminded me of that. Just the visuals in the first area, how you're thrown in, you're like, I don't know what to do. But then you look and you just sit back and kind of experience the game and take a look, and there's very leading lines guiding you everywhere you need to go. And that was something that really stood out to me, and just seeing how they evolved throughout the game was really incredible. And then of course when you get to the area that flips you around, that was a really big standout, because like, I mean, I've never played Soten Symphony of the Night, but I know about the flip in there, and suddenly you're running through the castle upside down. But it was really cool how they played with physics and stuff like that in this game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For me, the red area is the first like color that you experience, and that one really stuck out to me because you could tell whatever happened to her, like she was in pain, right? And the red really stuck out as like pain, like that color, especially at the part where the wind blows and then it's like pushing her backwards. Like the color along with the music that plays at that point felt really powerful to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the music, because that is one of the songs I had brought with me today to listen to, and we might get a moment to listen to that once everyone else has had a chance to speak. For those of you in the audience who have not played the game and want a bit of reference, the red area is the first area that Gree is able to advance to after leaving behind the gray world that she encounters. And when she first enters this world, the camera is panned up very close to her, and she's moving very slowly. And if you've ever played an MMO, the first thing you really want to do is jump around everywhere. And so when you hit the X button, or whatever your jump button is, whatever controller you have to use, you actually don't jump. You fall down on the ground. It causes you to fall.
Do you
And
want screenshots
yeah.
here to go with what you're saying?
Yeah,
I can throw that on
absolutely.
here. I
Yes.
took some images
visuals would be fantastic.
to accompany.
Greg
what
is
you're
that
saying.
kid that sits in the front row and like does all the work like
I
early.
did extra homework. Is that okay?
I know exactly what page that's on.
All right. So we were, to very.
So
quickly
this is
catch
that
up with you.
first area, and she's kind of, you can tell even through her posture that there's something that she's dealing with. And of course, the context of having fallen very far from the statue's hand, and having shown sadness at losing her ability to sing. And then here she's collapsed on the ground, and eventually she works her way through this area, and then the game kind of finally allows you to run and then jump, and you are able to find these little, to me they represented stars, because eventually you do see them up in the sky in an area whose
They're like very small light balls.
yeah, very small light, and they have nice tones that go with them. And the name of the song in the soundtrack is called Firmament. So anyway, I digress. But once you pick those up, you are able to advance to new areas, such as this center area, where this seems to be the center of her world. And as you progress through the game, this shifts and changes. And that's kind of the basis of the question I asked, which is, were there any areas that stuck out to you? So, and then Nujj mentioned in this red area, as Gree tries to proceed, there's a blast of wind like this that prevents her from moving forward, and it will actually cause her to roll backwards if you try to go through it. So very light platforming elements here. There's no way to really fail other than you have to try again, which is also a really interesting design choice, which I'm not sure if that's narrative or not, which I guess could be another question. Did you guys think about that? I know, Greg, that's kind of in your wheelhouse there.
Yeah, and I mean, I wanted to mention the red section here too, because I think that's one of the moments that you can sort of especially point to as the idea of, a narrative element becoming a sort of game mechanic, where this is sort of the first like thematic area after this sort of like transition intro, and this idea of just being sort of blasted backwards by the wind. I mean, it's a video game, and we're all sort of many years trained to just scroll the screen, and that's progress, is moving to the right from the left, and the idea of just literally being pushed backwards by what is this very sort of strong visual reinforcement of the theme here, and then the game mechanic being that basically you can, more or less turn to stone and just kind of plant yourself and resist these blasts of wind. And so that's the idea of, you can point to any number of things as what the story is about or whatever, but in any case, it's easy to say that the thing that you've acquired narratively and mechanically is the ability to sort of like withstand this thing that's keeping you from progressing.
Yeah.
So as a game mechanic, you almost don't need like an exact answer to what the story is to still be sort of getting something narrative. I thought that worked really well.
Yeah, I would say as well, going back to what Greg was saying earlier, why did this have to be a game? What does the fact that it is a game rather than a movie add to the narrative experience? And it's moments like that, getting to like experience the floor, basically everything crumbling out when you try to jump for the very first time, and getting to actually deal with the experience of physically getting knocked back, seeing your character move in the opposite direction by this wind, and learning how to resist that. It adds a layer of immersion to the game that you wouldn't get if it were in any other kind of medium. And I think that sort of effect is precisely what makes this game so powerful. Also, I'll say, going back again to how we were talking about that first area, I remember when I played the game for the first time, it took me a while to realize that the statue of the woman is the same statue that you see at the beginning of the game. The areas that you see and revisit as you progress in abilities and progress through the colors, it's the exact same area each time, and you get to like see all the things that you get to explore, all the areas that are familiar, and re-experience them in a new way. And I think that adds so much value to Gree as an experience.
Yeah, just that whole because when you do encounter this statue, there are different forms of it. So some of them, they show the woman clasping her face in sorrow, and then others, they show her taking a step with her hair in her face, her head down, but she's still trudging along. And these are the kind of narrative hints that it really tried to tell the story, as in addition to the things that you were mentioning, like getting blown back and experiencing that, and that having that empathy, you know, of going, oh, this is difficult, or like there's something blocking my way, and you're inserting yourself into the game, but at the same time observing it. And that's something that only video games can do. Right. And I just found that to be so powerful with this, because when I first got into this game, it was because of an ad. And I'm always going to be wanted to be like, oh, ads don't work on me, but it did in this game, because it was just so beautiful. And I could tell that it had something that it wanted you to experience, but just by watching the ad, I didn't know what that was, even though I was seeing the same cutscenes that I was playing through, seeing the same areas that I ended up playing through. And I think that in and of itself is proof that this did deserve to be a game, and they had a specific vision for it.
When talking about these statues, I kind of assumed that who this story is actually about is whoever the statue person is. Like, that's what they actually look like. And then the little character that you're controlling is more like maybe her emotional health or something like that. I kind of figured that the main, so like when the person is crumbling, like that's who the story actually is. You don't get to be them, but you can be kind of their essence.
Do you think the statues reflect the controllable character? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying like they're an observer, like seeing whoever the statue represents, and then it's some sort of
like I feel like they're
representation
interconnected, as if almost like the emotions of whoever the statue person is the little controllable character that you're controlling.
Got it.
That's how I interpreted it as well, is that the statues are maybe what they're presenting in their outer life, and obviously they went through some sort of a struggle, and then the game is about the journey that they need to take to piece themselves back together and get their voice back.
Yeah.
I have kind of a silly question here, but I don't know how like spoiler averse we are right now. I mean, there's
massive spoilers.
Massive spoilers. Yeah, I mean,
big spoiler warning.
All right, you know, I said it first. I mean, the game kind of bookends on this, you know, the character and the statue, and the idea of it sort of coming apart in the beginning, and you know, here, screenshot time. You know, this idea of like she's singing, and then I guess in the I'm struggling with my screenshots here. Like losing her voice, more or less. Sorry, I had a thing for that too. There we go.
No worries.
Like actually they're singing, and then her voice sort of fails her, and she's sort of reflecting that. The statue falls apart. And then throughout the game, you're getting the repetition of those statues until it basically plays out in reverse. And, you know, the sort of ending is this like recombining of all of the fragments here back into this statue, and her voice sort of being the thing that's reassembling it, instead of it almost being this thing that's like stolen from her. It's like her voice is the thing bringing it back together again. And, you know, it's almost, you know, again, that idea that like you can look at it different ways in terms of what the relationship between these two things is, but in either case, that's the sort of like story and mechanical element that's kind of like gluing those two parts of the story together.
So speaking of the experience, the journey along the way, to answer the question I asked a long time ago, which was, are there any areas that stuck out to you? The one that really stuck out to me was I believe the second area, the forest. And that's when the color shifts to more of a green, away from a red. And Gree, the main character, she encounters a creature in the forest who you help return to their home. But they have this, there's this little cutscene that plays where they embrace, and she kind of hugs this creature and twirls around, and you help feed it. It's almost like a pet, like a friend, but I viewed it more as like this friendship that she experiences. And through her expressions, that little creature there, through her facial expressions and her body language, it really showed me that she was that she was finding happiness here, finding some sort of satisfaction by having this company. But it was really powerful to me that this was the second area, if we're counting the colored ones as red being first and green being second. That this was second and not somewhere near the end of the narrative. I felt that its placement was significant. And whatever it is that she's dealing with emotionally, like the presence of this creature whom she helps, and the creature doesn't necessarily help that much back in return. I thought it was a really interesting thing because to me, she's dealing with grief is my interpretation of it. And the fact that she, in her grief, is then reaching out and having this sort of relationship with this creature, that was interesting. Because whenever I think about somebody who's suffering, I feel like, oh, I want to help them, right? I don't think they should help me, right? And I don't think the story was saying that she had to, but I thought it was interesting that the fact that she did have that relationship helped there. So what do you guys think about that?
To me, I think it was significant that it was just second in the placement, because it showed that it's not a complete linear path from like, I feel terrible and I feel a little bit better and better and better. Oh, I'm great now. Like, that's not how this was at all. Yeah. You know, sometimes things get better and then they get worse again. And you have to climb back up from that. And it's not just this linear path that you follow to the end. It's very meandering.
I fully agree with that too. And this whole section reminded me of the plain like air mask analogy, if people don't know it for mental health, but it's you have to be able to put on your own air mask and get yourself to a good level before you can try to help someone else, because you're not supposed to make someone else's life your like a priority ahead of yours. Like, you need to be able to always take care of yourself, and so you're at a level where you can help people. But that's what I thought about this part, is the little block creature friend kind of helps you get back to a slightly better place enough so that you're able to pick yourself up and continue on your journey and figure out where you need to get to.
I also think it's cute the way that they develop the friendship. At first, when the creature's following you, if you turn around and look at it, then it'll immediately just hide from you. Yeah. But then as you develop a trust with it, then it eventually gets to the point where the creature starts copying your motions, and you have to use that in order to solve puzzles, in order to get to the next ability sanctuary power-up area. And I thought that was really cute.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was thinking as well. I mean, the idea of that progression of what this sort of little friendship is, and it echoes in the colors really well, I thought, too, because you come to this area and it's called green. I'm going to back up here. You're sort of falling into this, and it's still very, very red. So, like, the idea of whatever green is meant and whatever red is meant to represent is still here. And there's sort of this, like, color shift across this section, where as you sort of interact with this creature who is itself green, you are sort of going through like this area where it is from, and you're sort of seeing, let me find it here, like its little home area with all of its little like family or whatever is this very green area. And, you know, if you want to believe that that's some kind of progression towards like, you know, better health or something, the idea of this like sort of traversal through this spot stuck out to me. But yeah, I mean, I liked that same read where, you know, if this is a character's journey through, you know, grief or depression or something, the idea that there's, you know, some element of just sort of reaching outside of your own situation to sort of impact somebody else's life or to help somebody else or something, as being a way to sort of help yourself as well. It echoed really well in what the game feel was, because it was very lonely to that point, and now you have this sort of delightful little thing sort of following you around and copying your game mechanics, and it just felt like it was a nice like reprieve.
I thought it was the cutest thing when it would copy you.
Yeah, that's this here. It would sort of turn into a stone and help you like break blocks to progress.
It was such a nice contrast too to the beginning, where you're immediately thrust into like gray, no color at all, and then finally you get this in this completely different world. And I know Rose said earlier he didn't dive in too much into the game, because I feel like if you don't get here, it's easy to get bored in the first area, but as soon as they start throwing color at you, it becomes more intriguing. You see how the game grows and shifts and changes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that the copying aspect also was really cute.
was.
But yeah, that I just learned that creature is a plush, and
I
I
know,
might
I
be
want it
going
so
somewhere
bad.
after this panel.
I really
Same.
want it.
Sorry about that. Me too, though.
But the thing with the creature copying you, I felt that was kind of a subtle way to say that, to reflect this idea of empathy, right?
Mhm.
That in order to get through this awfulness, the wind blowing at her in the previous area, she has to her dress turns into a blocky shape, like, and it has these stone like sound effects, and you're walking very
It's like
slowly
Kirby.
and thumping. Yeah,
That's what I thought of too.
very much like Kirby. And I feel like the creature, he's like, I know what that's like, right? And he is in the shape of a cube, right? And to kind of connect this with the whole color aspect, because you're in different areas that connect to a main hub, but when you complete these areas, the main hub shifts and transforms and looks different.
Exactly.
And at first, I didn't realize that I was back in the same spot from before.
Yep, same
Yeah,
here.
And when I did, it dawned on me that it might be because the storytellers wanted to emphasize that when you go through some sort of emotional journey, your world will look very different to you, right? It's just a different, you're looking at your world through a different lens, through a different perspective, a different emotional spot. And that's why I thought the different colors mattered. And you would end up being able to access different areas depending on how the world shifted based on your completion of whatever, I guess, emotional analogy that you were going through at that time.
Yeah.
So
I
that was
think the
another
other-
thing that really made it stick out to me. Go ahead.
To add on to that point, I think the other reason why it took I had the same experience. It took us both a while to realize that they were part of the same interconnected hub. And I think another part of the reason for that was that both the first two areas involve you falling so much that it doesn't occur to you that they can possibly be connected, and only by the point where you eventually do make that climb all the way back up and you get to the statue's hand again, to realize that it's the same statue. The fact that you fall so much and then overcome these obstacles to get back up, I think, is a huge part of what drives this home from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, that to me, when I first started the game, and a lot of those cutscenes, they're scripted exactly to last as long as however the music was designed to be, right? So you were falling as the music's playing for like 30 seconds, and it's just like, oh, okay, I'm just falling, and just to match it with the music. But it actually had, like Danny, like you said, it had a very specific narrative purpose too. So yeah, I also agree with you there heavily.
And I mean, that's one of the things, just to sort of go off on a bit of a tangent here, that I love about sort of analyzing games as a narrative structure, is that, you sort of have like all of the affordances of almost every other type of media, where, you can have a section that is, really like showing you the benefit of this beautiful video game music by sort of making the short film around it and giving you a sort of just animated sequence that's not so much player control as it is just sort of like giving you a break for a moment to sort of watch this and make sure that, it's giving you the sort of full emotional impact of what this, visual is, or what this score is. And I thought that this game really blended a very sort of like animated film art style with, the ability to actually directly play something that looks and acts like a film like this very well.
So we spoke about the creature that Gray encounters, but we did not talk about the inky blob type creature, and that one kind of appears, and it seemed to have come almost like from the environment itself, or it just kind of shows up at some point. And this is one of the things that I haven't yet quite decided what it means to me yet. So I was curious what your guys' interpretations were.
I kind of interpreted the whole game, like we were saying, struggles throughout mental health. And I saw this as kind of the temptation to relapse back to where you were before you've come to a point where you're further ahead, especially just because of how it interacts with Gree, the character, and pushes her around, and you're running from it and it's chasing you. And then just when you think you're past that and beyond it, it jump scares you completely in a different form later in the game. There's precisely one jump scare in this game, and it got me and then everyone who was watching me stream it at the same time.
I got the exact same thing as Monica out of it too, which is that, this idea, like this section here coming out of Green, where you're finally like ascending. You've been descending and descending, like falling for entire, vertical miles several times throughout the story. But one spot where you're finally feeling like you're climbing, like you get up to this spot and, you can do different things with the statue. But what happens here for sure is this giant, like inky monster sort of like comes and interrupts you. And it's the thing like blowing you backwards again for the first time since being able to deal with that, as turning into a stone. And it adapts across the story too. This thing sort of screaming at you to blow you across the screen, and you're sort of turning back into this block to get through it. But it's good at sort of adapting to the environment too, to the point that like it turns away from being a bird when you're underwater into being this giant eel, and sort of like this idea that something, maybe internal is chasing you and sort of like evolving to sort of match whatever defenses you've, prepared against it. I thought was really just a cool visual way to sort of tell that in a visual storytelling sort of game.
Yeah, I also got the same interpretation that is representative of trauma. And what really stuck out to me too is throughout the course of the game, you keep on visiting the statue and you're in the statue's hand. And each time you go there, the statue becomes more and more complete. And after you go there the fourth time, you finally get to see its eyes open for the very first time. And then as soon as that happens, then the ink monster comes back and destroys it like pretty much completely.
Yeah.
And then ultimately devours you too.
Yep.
As the character. So I thought that moment in particular, when the statue opens its eyes and then the monster breaks it, I think that is you finally coming face to face with your experience with loss. You're staring grief literally right in the face, and that dark mental side that is traumatized by that sees that as an attack and then responds accordingly by destroying the statue.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
No, please.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I've noticed that as well, Danny. What you mentioned is the fact that it takes you so long into the game to finally see the statue's actual face, because usually there's hair in it, or like when we see it in the beginning, it's hiding completely. So it takes so long to be able to see what's going on and get a picture of it.
Yeah, that was my sort of standout moment too, as far as things that really sort of stuck with me visually, was this moment of the statue where there's this sort of idea that, I guess my interpretation sort of immediately hit that this was, the character's sort of own self in some form or another. And I don't know if that's, something you could look at different ways as well. But this idea of sort of coming face to face with it, but like you can't sort of meet its eyes. Like I don't know if that's, some kind of dissociative sort of feeling of just like not sort of being able to like face something yet, or not sort of being able to recognize something. But that moment sort of it gradually reassembling to the point that, yeah, you get there and you do sort of finally see the full thing here. That's, I think, one of the more powerful visuals in the whole game for sure.
Yeah. I think also, just to bring it back to the whole why does this have to be a game aspect, that conversation. The thing about this visual and how it's all metaphorical, how it's all symbolic, to me helps cover the fact that they're not communicating to you exactly what she's upset about, right? We don't know, right? And I think that's the point, is that we don't need to know, right? All we need to know is that she is suffering, right? And she's trying to make it through. And I think that's a really powerful message, because it's reflecting the fact that when we do see other humans out in the real world, we don't know what's going on in their lives, but we do have the power, the empathy to be able to see that they might be going through something tough, right? And that's where our choices should start. Like, can we be kinder to them? Can we offer support? Because it shouldn't be what they're upset about that determines that action. It's the fact that they are. And that's what really made this game stand out to me, and why I ultimately did decide that, like, I do think this is a very powerful narrative game, or narrative in general, even though it lacks the specificity of, let's say, like a novel, right? Or a movie, which I would say most audiences demand such details, right? And that's where video games as an art form really fill in that void of, how can we represent a theme that doesn't come through because of the narrative genre or medium that was that any artist could consider.
I love that you brought that up, and it absolutely resonates with me too. And I think that's why the game feels more relatable, because it's you going through it. And everyone's been through struggles in their actual life. And that's kind of why I think it makes the game feel a little more immersive. And it feels like just that they throw like this beautiful ethereal artwork at you as you're experiencing it too. And yeah, I fully agree with, that's why it had to be a game, and that they don't tell you what she's going through. And I love that, because it leaves it up for interpretation and kind of makes it more relatable, rather than, oh, she's going through this. Like, because as before we started the session too, we were talking, and there's an extra cutscene that I completely missed. Someone told me about it once I finished the game on stream, and I still never saw that. But I know you guys said you wish you hadn't. Do they like kind of spoil and push it more in a certain direction in that cutscene?
I haven't
I
watched
would
the cutscene.
say-
Oh, go ahead.
I would say yes. I would say the cutscene makes it more explicit.
Yeah.
Basically what happens is you see a scene with the playable character as well as the character of the statue, except the character of the statue is not a statue anymore. It's like their actual flesh self. And you see a scene of the two of them together in which the statue character is in the same pose as the actual statue itself. I think that to me that represents that sort of experiencing the loss of a loved one, which is what the character is going through. Even so, it's still wordless and it's still up to interpretation, but that's personally how I view that.
Based off of everyone's advice, I'll leave it like I did for the last season of Dexter, just never watched it. The last episode of Game of Thrones, never watched it. I'll leave that cutscene untouched.
That's one of my own favorite, don't do's in media as well. I love that. No, I thought the same thing, and I almost didn't like that it felt like it was kind of like concretizing it a little bit, and like, these were different characters. I guess I had that wrong the whole time, because like it is so just like open to interpretation. I really love that in storytelling, and I did feel like that final cutscene was like meant to be kind of a payoff that I guess I'm the sort of person that maybe didn't want that, where a lot of people might.
Yeah, I like having the book open-ended.
yeah, and I mean it's still really good, and I mean of course it's beautiful as well. I would say it's one of those things where I'm like game mechanics guy today, sorry, but if you're telling a game story, the idea that the story needs to work without that, because that's basically the completionist reward for like you went and found all the little puzzle areas and you sort of did some extra hard platforming and all of that, so they're giving you a reward in a story form. It's a story game, so the reward's going to be more story. It makes sense. But like, assuming that not every player is going to do that or necessarily can do that, the story needs to be intact on its own without that extra bit. And I sort of like that, because I think that's, one of those things that you can't really reward extra effort in other media as well. It's like almost the sort of like, did you stay and watch the whole credits to get the little scene after the movie thing, but like in an interactive form. But yeah.
Yeah,
I would say as well,
go ahead.
like even with the addition of the extra credit scene, there's still a lot that's open to interpretation. I interpreted that scene as the main character's memory of the past, but you can still see it as like the character coming to terms with their idealized self, and it's never made explicitly clear what it is, because there are basically no words in this game, and the fact that it is so wordless and so interpretive makes it super powerful.
Yeah.
Even just going back to the design elements, and I'm sure Greg, you can comment on this more. Like the way that the shapes are structured, it's all like very basic shapes. The way that the colors are, there's a lot of like I don't even know, flat colors and gradients, the way that they're all splashed together. Aesthetically, it really suits the game's overall story.
A good screenshot of that sort of visual blend here somewhere. I guess this one will work, but yeah.
I think, I agreed too. And then you can see like how it transforms and becomes more complex, like especially when you get to that area where you're interacting with the physics and you're trying to figure out like, hey, how the heck am I supposed to jump from like point A to point B when it flips suddenly? And no, it's great.
And not to derail, but that's one thing that I feel like, there's always a couple things anyone would change about a game. I did feel like that was almost surprising to me, that there was a section of like slightly difficult platforming, because I feel like this is such an accessible game in so many ways, and I feel like it was really designed to be an accessible game, that I could see somebody that's playing a game for the first time not sort of having the couple decades of Super Mario Brothers to know like how to jump very precisely, to not hit the sort of thing that flips gravity to get to the platform or whatever. And I was like, this is almost a little harder than I feel like it should be. But
agreed, because like the game is so visual, so every puzzle you get to is a visual puzzle. Yeah. And you do have all the pieces of the puzzle, but always when I got to the puzzle at first, I'm like, there's something obvious that I'm missing and is making me feel like a buffoon. And then so you take a step back and then you figure it out. Or I like that, like when you're at the underwater part, and like I don't understand. You can go to a different area and come back. I liked that too.
I was streaming this, playing this, and I definitely had a few moments of sitting there kind of getting embarrassed, like, okay, I'm an idiot, like this should probably be simple, but people are watching me play it, so
Yeah, I also had the same experience the first time I played the game, in the part where that dividing line is, you can see it here on the screenshot, going through a little diagonally off center, and if you hit that line, gravity reverses. There, as Greg was saying, there were some areas where you had to do some very precise jumps to that one.
That's the one
where you had to avoid hitting that line so you can reach the area in the left side, where that little light blue line is. You had to eventually land there, and so kind of having your head go topsy-turvy for all this. And
sorry.
And I just kind of felt that was maybe, even though like the world, you're seeing the world being very beautiful, and you also, your ability in this area that you have to use is your singing ability. You actually get it back before you finish the rest of the game, which to me was the way for them to hint to you that, oh, this game's not about her not being able to sing, right? It was because you, otherwise the game would end, right? The story would end there. But you have to use it to keep advancing. And if you notice, there's this kind of silhouette of a flower bulb, like the petals have not yet. You have to sing, and your voice has a radius that it goes out to. And once it overlaps that, it will open up. And so you're affecting the environment in very beautiful ways. You're allowing things to kind of open up, and literally, but by seeing the beauty of the world, but then everything's still all messed up, all jumbled because of the upside down nature. So I just felt that was a very, a very apt representation of life, where like you can still find beauty in things, but still it still might not make sense to you. right?
I
Yeah.
fully agree with that. And then I think too, it adds to it because like as the game progresses, you get more abilities and you use all of those to traverse an increasingly complex environment. And at the end, like that's why I interpreted the whole game as the story of a journey of someone going through something. They start out like bleak rock bottom, they have nothing, and they learn to piece themselves back together eventually.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of which, I think that the abilities that you get also serve the overall narrative structure very well.
Yeah.
The first one you get is being able to become rock solid and resilient, which lets you resist the winds that are fighting against you. Second area, you have a friend that is helping you solve the puzzles. You also get the ability to double jump and rely on these red like butterfly things to go even higher. So you went from not being able to jump at all to all of a sudden jumping huge amounts. The third area, the way that you swim is like really fun in this game.
Yeah.
You're like absolutely moving, and it's really neat to be in control of so much speed after the game had progressed relatively slowly thus far. And then the fourth area where you're literally flipping things on their heads, as well as finally regaining the ability to sing, which has been such an important thing that was established at the very beginning. It all really goes to serve the overall narrative structure super well.
And you know, the moment that like I was a little bit frustrated with the mechanics of this, almost kind of on other people's behalf. But the thing that really redeemed all this for me, I mean, you can imagine that like the couple of people sit down and it's like, okay, here's what the story is, here's what the level design needs to be. Doing this whole like flipping and reversing and all of that, I had totally missed it the first time through, but at the beginning of the game, there's just this really sort of compelling visual of landing. Where is it here? In this sort of space here where it's like this void space where you're on the sort of dark side and you're seeing this white side with the silhouette and all of these sort of flapping like bird shapes or whatever. Didn't mean to zoom there. But after this flip, which is basically the whole screen sort of like rotates around, not very long in the game after that, you come back to this space after being, well, literally like sort of swallowed by this giant ink monster thing, swimming through this just pure, like the darkest spot of the game with all the shattered sort of statue pieces. And then you arrive back here, but this time you've flipped. So this idea that like that is the same world that's flipping, even in the game mechanic sense, when you're flipping back and forth as you're sort of like, you know, mastering all of this and getting yourself ready to traverse it, like this is the sort of visual that it lands you on. And that meant a lot more to me the second time through. And I really freshly sort of appreciated the like metal storm gravity flip mechanic.
It's such a stark contrast to where you were before, and like definitely plays into the narrative of the game and the part of the journey that she's at too. Like it feels like that's right where she's finally on the tipping point of are you going to be able to piece yourself back together, or will you relapse again into another difficult situation?
And the final conflict as well emphasizes that point too, where she's trying to sing and then the blackness is increasing and almost to the point of consuming her, but then ultimately she's able to power through it.
Yeah. This visual here to end on there was a really strong one, that sort of, you know, the combination of the statue coming back together, the singing sort of restored to that same echoed first scene, the song mirroring there from the beginning and the end in terms of the game's score. And then that's the kind of like, you know, culmination of all of this coming back together and sort of feeling intact again. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna wind down now. We've been at this for about 50 minutes. So just any final impressions that you guys wanted to share before we hop off here?
This game has convinced me I now need to get it together and finally play Journey after putting it off, because I've heard amazing things about that one, and it felt like very similar at the starting. And I've played Abzu and I adored that. It's one of my favorite games. So yeah, I'm inspired to play more games like this, and just it's a quick play too. Like if you're someone who's watching and you haven't played it, absolutely I recommend it. It's an experience more than a game, it feels like, really, and definitely a piece of art.
Yeah.
I think the developers mentioned specifically Journey and Ori and the Blind Forest as inspiration projects, and I think both of those have very shared DNA to this one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll also say, even if you have watched this panel and haven't played the game, it's 100% still worth playing the game and getting to experience these things for yourself. Because listening to us talk about it, we appreciate how it's done, but it definitely doesn't compare to the experience of actually playing it. It's cheap. It's relatively short. You can beat it in like a couple of hours, but it's a wonderful journey.
Bingo.
Yeah.
I
really loved it. Yeah.
I'm glad you guys mentioned Journey and Ori and the Blind Forest. I admittedly haven't played those myself, but I feel like that's an opportunity because I do plan on continuing these sessions. I hope, and for this session, it was limited to staff of VGMT, but I hope in the future to be able to include other people, those of you out in the audience, if you'd be interested in joining this just in general, not necessarily VGMT oriented. But the thing that I wanted to end with about this game that made it really stick with me was, we've already kind of mentioned this a lot, was just, this is just the power of video games. Like, people have dismissed video games. I just heard it the other day. Like, some guy was just saying, "What are you doing in your life? You're 30. You're playing video games." Like, and it's just so dismissive, right?
Agreed.
And I feel like if people were to look at this kind of storytelling, see the merits of it, like hear these kinds of conversations we're having, I feel like they would take it seriously, right? And they would find that there's this whole medium of art that they were unaware of. And I think that's, I want them to be able to experience this, right?
Mhm.
And so for you guys, and that's where you, when you bring up like Journey and Ori and the Blind Forest, I'm going, wow, there's so much more out there that I can explore too, even though I'm already aware of these things, right?
Mhm.
So I hope to continue doing these conversations with you guys. I hope those of you out in the audience who have been here with us, either for the whole time or for part of the conversation, I invite you to show your interest or form your own clubs to talk about this kind of stuff. Book clubs exist everywhere. I never really heard about a narrative game club, but here we are.
Yeah.
So, but that's all we got for you today, guys. So we will see you at some point, hopefully in the future. And goodbye.